if we just can have the gumption to just make our way to the foot of the cross, and for the rest of our lives, hang on to the cross. That's the freedom, and it's only in Christ.
Welcome to First Person, a weekly conversation. I'm Wayne Shepherd, and we'll be talking in a few minutes with a fellow broadcaster, Charles Morris of Haven Today. First Person is here each week at this time for the purpose of getting to know the stories of people who, through good times and bad, always point us to the faithfulness of God to protect and provide for His people. Through the months that this relatively new program has been on the air, we've heard the life stories of people from all walks of life and learned how God has called them and prepared them for His purposes. So if you'd like to go back into the archive and hear from people like Ravi Zacharias, Tony Dungy, Odessa Settles, and many others, simply go to our website, firstpersoninterview.com, click on the archive button, and choose from the growing list of interviews. Again, we're found online at firstpersoninterview.com. As an interviewer, I've always enjoyed listening to Charles Morris on the Haven Today broadcast, as he often interviews guests and ties his topics into Scripture. But as I've gotten to know Charles through the years, I've come to realize there is more to his own story that contributes to his skill and heart as a broadcaster. I recently sat down with Charles at a meeting of the National Religious Broadcasters in Nashville. Well, Charles, I'm going to turn the tables on you today. The interviewer becomes the interviewee.
Okay.
And talk to you about your life.
Hey, Wayne, I can't think of anybody better that I would enjoy sitting down with. And we have, of course, many times. Right. But I'm a little uncomfortable being the interviewee, but we'll give it a try.
You'll
okay?
do fine.
Thank
You'll
you.
do just fine.
Thank you very much.
You are the host of Haven Today. Everybody knows that. But talk to me about the ministry of Haven Today. You bring a different style to the program.
77 years, yes. Haven started back when Christian radio was not even Christian radio, even though it was Christian radio. And I don't even know, other than maybe in Chicago, one station, and a couple of other places, if there were any Christian stations back in the 30s. Haven Today, it was called Haven of Rest originally. I'm the fourth speaker now. It was started by a man who was famous in radio. There was no TV, and if you see his picture, maybe he wouldn't have been famous in TV had there been TV. He had drunk his way through every radio gig on air as well as manager in the number 2 market in America. And his wife had kicked him out. They had small children. Can't have an alcoholic living, in our home. And he ended up on the street in San Diego. But he had heard the gospel. Those were the days when just about everybody in America had grown up going to church. But it wasn't his gospel. And he hit the rock bottom. And his wife had been praying for him, even though she couldn't let him live at home. And so he went into a church, and they wouldn't receive him. Now, who knows what he looked like after, a lot of drinking, and what he smelled like and what he was wearing, but they wouldn't have anything to do with him. So he went back, and it was the Gideon Bible story. He knew where to find the gospel, so he gave his life to the Lord, confessed his sins. Yeah. And what do you do if you're a radio guy and you've been saved? So a month later, a program was born, and you were supposed to have, music on the air. So he goes to the Bible college where some decades later, Jim Dobson would graduate from, and he finds himself a quartet, and you needed an organist because those were the days, of the theater pipe organ.
Yeah, very dramatic sounding.
And a month later, Haven of Rest was born. And at times it was on secular networks too.
It'd be easy to do what you do and forget the history that's behind it. You
Sure.
like to remember it, don't you?
Sure. I do, even though we live in a day where so many of our younger listeners, and we do have a few younger listeners, they don't really care about our history. But what struck me years later, when I came 11 years ago now to Haven as the speaker, it amazed me that any time I was someplace and the Haven of Rest hymn played, anyone who was over 60 started crying. And I came out of a secular background, and I didn't understand that. It's kind of like taking the trip to Israel and the tour guide that as you're leaving that road from Jericho and the sun is beginning to set, and boom, there's Jerusalem below you, and He puts in Kate Smith singing, the Holy City. It's that kind of an experience. That was surprising to me. My predecessor, Wayne, the third speaker, Ray Ortlund, who died just a couple of years ago, he dropped the rest part because they kept getting phone calls asking if this was a retirement center or a crematorium. He said enough is enough of that. So,
and you're grateful you didn't have to deal with that part of it.
No, I added a word. I didn't take some words away.
Right,
so that's another story.
I mean, listeners know, but what is your philosophy? How do you approach the program today? You have such interesting guests on.
Well, we have a slogan, which really is what Haven has been about forever, telling the great story. It's all about Jesus. And as we hear from our listeners, they call or they email or whatever, we keep hearing back. We think the Lord gave us that, told us, this is your message. What we hear from them is, you're that program that's about Jesus. And some days we do interviews. Some days I'll do a message. But whether I'm talking about shootings in some far part of the world or tsunamis or whatever's going
revolutions.
on. Revolutions. How does that figure in with the gospel? And I see that as being the main thing that North Americans, and in particular American Christians, have lost sight of. We want to change the world. We want to change things for the better. But we want to do it in light of, tell me what to do.
Yeah. So you connect the dots, don't you?
I have a duty to point people to the gospel, to Jesus Christ. And by the gospel, I don't mean just walking the aisle, saying the sinner's prayer, confessing my sins, and then I go out and live as hard as I can to follow these 10 rules or whatever. The gospel never ends. Every day, grace is new.
God has prepared you for this role in some very unique ways. I want to talk to you about that.
Sure.
I want to talk to you about life before Haven today.
I don't know if I could say everything.
And the various things that you did, and how, when you look back on that now, you see how that shaped you and got you ready for this assignment.
Well, yeah, Wayne, as you know, and you're leading me in with that, I was a secular journalist. I really didn't like the Christian media when I was a secular journalist, even though I was a follower of Christ. I wasn't walking with Christ, but I was truly a born-again Christian. I worked for United Press International, which is not so much a company today, but it was like Associated Press or Reuters
top
or
of the heap, sure.
Agence France Presse. And, our Chicago office was, in the building, the stone container building, Paul Harvey and I would get on together, and he wouldn't always have his rug on, so I'd have to look twice to realize it was Paul Harvey. It's very interesting, even when I was in the media, the fear factor of Christians, much less Christian media. Christians were not thought of having the answers, and there was a great fear factor. Sure, if you get to New York, it's going to be maybe in the national, international media, you're going to be predominantly certain stereotypes are true. But the fact is that there was always a desire for truth, to share truth. But what people in the secular media didn't realize was that they were following a lie. At the same time, Christians really didn't know how to engage people in the secular media. I was sitting in a meeting of forming USA Today once that Gannett owned at the time. Now, USA Today's been out enough years that it's just old school at this point. But the idea of we need to do something to serve all those Christians out there across America, and they just didn't get it, And at the same time, we shoot ourselves in the foot as Christians.
So that's the world that you were a part of.
Yeah, I didn't want to be identified as a Christian, even though I was.
Okay.
Yeah, it was pretty bleak.
When did the turning point come then?
I was signed by UPI to run the state of Florida for them. I don't know how many people know this, but all the organizations, we like to think Fox News is conservative. I watch only Fox News. CNN is the liberal or whatever. They all get their news from the same place. It's not that big a deal. The tragedy of the internet is even a more liberal news organization like the New York Times is still the only newspaper in America that has 50 bureaus around the world. And so when something happens, you need somebody there that's going to tell the story and bring it back. So I was in Florida and with UPI, had an office in Miami, had an office in Orlando, and we pretty much served. We had bureaus in South America, but anytime something big happened, they would come out of the bureaus that I was in charge of, whether photographers or sports reporters or just news reporters. And as I did most Saturday nights, I got uproariously intoxicated. I wasn't an alcoholic, but the next day, Sunday morning, I woke up and I certainly had a clear head. Kind of like the demoniac, in the gospel, that somehow after Jesus healed him, he had a clear head. And
did that puzzle you?
It did. It had been a long time since that happened, and I knew I had to go to church. These were the days of the Yellow Pages, Wayne, which, you can identify with me. Yeah. Yes. I opened the Yellow Pages. I find a Bible-believing church. I go in and I went to church, and afterwards there was a visiting pastor, but another local pastor introduced ourselves. He said, "Who are you? What do you do?" And, we had that kind of a guy-to-guy conversation. And he said, "Would you like a cup of coffee?" And so we did, and that man brought me back to the Lord. And here, years later, that man still prays for me every day. It's amazing. So anyway, that's my story.
And we'll go deeper into the personal story of Charles Morris of Haven today, coming up on First Person. Next week, you'll meet the co-creator and voice of Larry Boy on VeggieTales.
I think God directs and leads, and just know that, okay, I feel very fortunate to do what I do and very grateful, and, just want to stay true to that original intent of ministry with what we do at VeggieTales.
Mike Naraki is not only Larry Boy, but also part of the creative team at VeggieTales, and you'll meet him next time on First Person. Charles, I love to have people tell their stories here on First Person, and I don't think that we fully can understand your story until we hear about a very painful chapter in the life of your family. Are you willing to talk about that?
Yes, I always say yes, Wayne, but, I never know how my emotions, sometimes they hold and, sometimes they don't. But sure, we can try if you'd like to.
It revolves around your son. One of your sons. Mm-hmm. Actually, both of your sons, right?
It ended up being both. That's right. And that I've never told anywhere other than just in snippets on our program before. Yeah.
When did this all play out?
Our older son, all his life, had problems. I remember when I was first getting into, for lack of any other word, Christian work, and we were living in Florida. I was doing a lot of work for a big church pastor who was on TV. And we never knew why our son always had problems. And I went to a bookstore, and I always go to bookstores, and I found this book, and I'm starting to read it. I'm saying, this is our son. And,
Are we talking about the normal teenage problems? Was he a teenager?
No. Yeah, he was a teenager, early teens. This was attention deficit disorder. And he wasn't really hyperactive with it, but that gave us some clues. We took him to a famous school to have him evaluated, and they spent 2 days with him in Philadelphia, and at Bryn Mawr College had this kind of teachers college, but one of the old Seven Sisters schools. And they said, your answer is you either need to board him at one of 3 boarding schools, which as Christian parents we were not willing to do, or you need to find a school somewhere where he can have more of a hands-on experience. And they didn't recommend homeschool. We'd tried to homeschool. We've done it all.
It was too much.
All our kids, yeah. So we ended up moving to Colorado Springs. We found a school there, the prep school of Colorado Springs, which was supposedly hands-on. We enrolled all 3 of our kids there. But he, after a year, was kicked out because he told the truth. He did marijuana. The other kids lied. None of them got kicked out. One of those sad stories. Things went to worse. I mean, we tried the boot camp in the Utah desert. which we found out later was run by people we wouldn't agree with. We did our Focus on the Family referral to a counselor. We did everything we possibly thought we could, and then we moved to California. I became the speaker of a national radio program, and finally got to the point. I went to a couple of Al-Anon meetings, and we had tried different places to put him, and nothing seemed to work.
How old is he at this point?
He would have been 20. And we kept thinking and always praying the next thing would be the answer. And eventually I couldn't let him live at home. Went to a couple of Al-Anon meetings, and we both, my wife and I, realized that we were encouraging him, so we couldn't let him live at home. And but eventually he just totally, was on the verge of going to jail. And so one Saturday afternoon, we get a phone call, and it's his girlfriend, and she's screaming in the phone, "He's dead, he's dead, he's dead." And Janet took the call. She said, no, he's not dead, he's not dead. Janet at this point is screaming back. But Janet says, "Where are you?" And they were sharing a place in San Clemente, a block from the beach, and just not even getting by, but other than to support a habit. But he died of a drug overdose. We got in the car. We grabbed our younger son. We have an older child, a daughter, who's married to a pastor in Oregon, and we raced down there. And by the time we got there, the yellow tape was up, and the Orange County Sheriff's officers had already sealed it off, and he really was dead. Interesting when these things happen to you, Wayne. The 6 weeks prior to his death, every Saturday night he'd give me a call, and his girlfriend confirmed this later. He had started reading the Bible again, but he'd call me Saturday night and he'd say, "Dad, how are you?" And I'd say, "Great, how are you, Jeff?" And he'd say, "Dad, can you pick me up? I want to go to church tomorrow. I want to hear the gospel." Not every parent can say this. I got another friend in L.A., and his son never professed faith in Christ. He was shot by police in a high-speed drug chase on the streets of L.A. But, we lost our son about 6.5 years ago now.
That's got to be just an almost unbearable pain. I mean, we have the Lord, of course, and if you don't have the Lord, and what do you have in that kind of situation? But describe the pain for you and your wife.
You always hear this, and I do believe it's true because I've talked to a lot of other parents since this happened to us. It's one thing to lose a spouse. It's one thing to lose a parent. It's a whole other thing to lose a child. You never get to get over it. My wife and I never know. She'll grieve sometimes. I grieve at other times, and it also can really pull a marriage apart too.
Yeah,
We've discovered that.
I realize that. How did it affect his brother, especially?
His younger brother was very, very angry at his older brother for taking his life or accidentally. Mm-hmm. We don't know for sure. The coroner never ruled specifically. We'll never know that for sure. But our younger son was the good little theologian who always had the answers. But about a month before our older son died, we're in church. The communion, the cup is passed, and our younger son did not take communion. And wow.
You took note
for
of that.
For a parent, my wife and I both tried to act like we didn't notice, but we swallowed hard, and I teared up. Janet teared up. That was the beginning. He had begun to question his faith. And I remember a few weeks after his older brother died, we were driving somewhere together, and he was just so angry. He said, "Dad, how in the world could Jeff have gotten into such a state of life that he would just give himself over?" And, you start drugs, and then you can go to a psychiatrist, and you can get psychotropic drugs to counter that. But if you are an addict, you're going to do both together, and that's just, it's double worse. And but about 2 months later, our son Peter, at a neighbor's house in an affluent neighborhood in Orange County, California, he pops his first OxyContin, and that begins his own road. And finally, I had to tell him, "You can't live at home." And finally, he finds, we get a call from somebody in Washington State where he's living. Our oldest, our daughter, and her husband, pastoring a church now, tried to take him in. But we got a call that he was mainlining heroin and was just... so here he was, someone who had all the answers. He knew the Bible inside and out. And now his life was a mess. But you know what? We did an intervention. Our daughter, who's, you know how kids are kids, and oldest child syndrome, and,
right.
you know, the Kevin Lehman principle at work, you know.
The birth order.
Our daughter says, I'm driving over to that center where he's in detox, and I am not leaving until he meets Jesus. Wow. We threw clothes in a suitcase. We're in Southern California. He's up on the Canadian border in Washington. We throw the dog in the car, 2 suitcases. We're driving. By the time we get to Oregon, our daughter calls us, and she's had him on the phone. She's at this dry out center, detox center, and she asks him. She goes in and she says, "Peter," this is the older sibling talking. "Peter, you just need Jesus." And, you know, he's crying, and, you know, he's in withdrawals, but he's still genuinely crying. Sure. He said, "I know that, you know, you need to just pray and ask Jesus to forgive you, but more than forgive you, to deliver you." "I know." "Well, do it." "Well, I did it last night, you know." "Have you told Mom and Dad?" "No." "Well, let's get him on the phone right now." Anyway, we picked him up. He went into Teen Challenge. And
it's got to be a rough road, but he came out okay.
Yeah, you know, it's not the Betty Ford Center, but it has Jesus there, and it works. If you stick it out, it works.
And now he's about to graduate from Moody Bible Institute.
I can't believe it. The little theologian in the family wanted to give his life to Jesus for the rest of his life. God's given him a wonderful wife who's our daughter-in-law, and we are so happy.
Such pain mingled with such joy. What's the lesson?
You know, Wayne, the head of another Christian ministry called me the day we buried our son. This head of ministry that very same day had to kick, that our son died, had to kick his daughter out of the home. Well, he asked me what you asked me. The only answer I know is to stay on your knees and to pray. There is no perfect set of rules to raise the perfect child, but grace trumps everything. Jesus died for sinners, not just my son Jeff, but me and you. And if we just can have the gumption to just make our way to the foot of the cross, and for the rest of our lives, hang on to the cross, that's the freedom. And it's only in Christ.
As someone has so aptly said, God never wastes our pain. And as devastating losing someone close to us is, as Charles and his wife Janet have experienced, it does show us how God can use even the worst the world throws at us to bring glory to Himself. Charles and Janet have written a book titled Saving a Life, How We Found Courage When Death Rescued Our Son. You'll find a link to the book on our website, firstpersoninterview.com. And while you're at the website, take the time to browse the list of interviews you'll find in the archive. That's firstpersoninterview.com. And we keep you posted on upcoming programs on our Facebook page, facebook.com/firstpersoninterview. Next week, Mike Naraki, a.k.a. Larry Boy of VeggieTales, would join us. Now, with thanks to my friend and producer Joe Carlson, I'm Wayne Shepherd. Join us next week for First Person.